Welcome to the Bitcoin Infinity Academy. I'm Knut Luke, and I'm here as always with Luke DeWolf. Good morning, Luke.
Good morning, Knut. Happy to be here. This is going to be a fun one, isn't it?
Yes, this is our third episode covering the second chapter of Sovereignty Through Mathematics, a chapter called Financial Atheism.
Yeah, and I know you're excited about this one, and it's certainly a little bit more controversial, I think, than the last one here. So I'm excited to dive in. And first, I'll just mention that if you want to get involved with the discussion, such as, for example, attending the recordings of these episodes live, check out our Geyser Fund page where you can see all the details about how to support this project. And as a reminder, the project is involving releasing all of the chapters of these books for free on Nostr, and these video explanations are also released for free. So if you get value out of this and want to join the discussion, the best way to support us is to get involved and join the Bitcoin Infinity Academy.
Absolutely. And you can also get the books on bitcoininfinitystore.com.
All right. This is Financial Atheism, Chapter 2 of Sovereignty Through Mathematics. Don't trust, verify is a common saying amongst Bitcoiners that represents a sound attitude towards not only Bitcoin, but all human power structures. In order to understand Bitcoin, one must admit that everything in society is man-made. Every civilization, every religion, every constitution, and every law is a product of human imagination. It wasn't until as late as the 17th century that the scientific method started to become the dominant practice for describing how the world actually worked. Peer-to-peer review and repeated testing of a hypothesis are still quite recent human practices. Before this, we were basically just guessing and trusting authorities to a large extent. We still do this today, and despite our progress over the last couple of centuries, we still have a long way to go. Our brains are hardwired to follow the leader of the pack. The human brain is born with a plethora of cognitive biases pre-installed, and we have to work very hard to overcome them. We evolved to survive in relatively small groups, and our brains are thus not really made for seeing the bigger picture. Bitcoin's proof-of-work algorithm is constructed in such a way that it is easy to verify that computational power was sacrificed in order to approve a block of transactions and claim its reward. In this way, no trust in any authority is required, as it is relatively trivial to test the validity of a block and the transactions it contains. This is nothing short of a complete reimagining of how human society ought to be governed. The beauty of mathematics governs the Bitcoin system. Everything that ever happens in Bitcoin is open and verifiable to everyone, even to those who are not yet using it. Okay, Knut, what did you mean by that?
That's a big question for a big paragraph. It's sort of saying that we have something now that is we have rules without rulers, I would say, that Bitcoin is completely auditable to everyone. Even the people not using it can, there are plenty of websites where you can see the blockchain. Of course, you need to run the software for yourself to actually know that what you're watching is the real thing. Third-party websites can be corrupt. Everyone should know that. So running a node is really the only option if you really want to be sure that what you're seeing is actually Bitcoin and not some clone. The point about the scientific method, that is something where my mind has, I've changed my mind slightly about some of the stuff in this chapter. One of those things is like the trust in the scientific method. Bitcoin has actually made me trust that method slightly less and see the beauty of the Austrian method, which is just deductive reasoning and coming to conclusions about the world using a fixed set of irrefutable axioms. So, which it cannot be called the scientific method, because the scientific method refers to empiricism. And the Austrian method is different like that, because it's not really empiricism. It's an a priori science where you know things without having to test them. And any testing cannot deny nor confirm the hypothesis. So that's how Bitcoin differs from other things. But this is sort of setting the stage here. We're getting into the juicy God stuff later in the chapter.
Yeah, I was going to say that this sort of has ended up being, it's just foreshadowing the main bulk of this thing, right? So you're laying the groundwork for quite a lot of stuff here, I would say, but it's not quite into the controversial part yet.
No, and Giacomo pointed out to us the day before yesterday when we did a Twitter Spaces, Giacomo Zucco from the Plan B Network, that he would have called this chapter Financial Skepticism. And in hindsight, that might have been a better title, even though Financial Atheism is a bit more on the nose and a bit more aggressive. But I'll lay out what I actually mean by atheism later in the chapter.
Perfect. Sounds good. On to the next one. After the tragic events of 9/11 in 2001, Sam Harris started writing his book, The End of Faith, which happened to be released around the same time as Richard Dawkins' The God Delusion, Daniel Dennett's Breaking the Spell, and Christopher Hitchens' God is Not Great, How Religion Poisons Everything. These books kickstarted what, in hindsight, has often been referred to as the New Atheist movement, even though there has arguably never been anything new about atheism. Atheism must almost certainly have preceded religion, since religious ideas require the person holding the idea to believe a certain doctrine or story. Atheism is nothing but the rejection of ways to describe the world that are not verifiable by experimentation. A fly on the wall is probably an atheist by this definition of the word. Atheism is often accused of being just another set of beliefs, but the word itself describes what it is much better: a lack of belief in theistic ideas. It is not a code of conduct or set of rules to live your life by. It is simply the rejection of that which cannot be scientifically verified. Many people, religious people in particular, have a hard time grasping this. If you believe that a supernatural entity created everything in everyone's life, you might not be too comfortable with a word that describes a complete rejection of what you believe created everything, including the very atheist that the word describes. The amount of different religious worldviews that exist is probably equal to the sum of all religious people on the planet. But all worldviews that reject these superstitious beliefs require but one word. Atheism is not the opposite of religion, but it is simply the lack of it. Okay. Not only is that a big, juicy paragraph, it's definitely one we disagree about quite a lot. And, well, let's get into it.
All right. What I would say is, in hindsight, is if I had written this today, I probably wouldn't have mentioned that fucker Sam Harris, because I really don't like him. And I think he sort of exemplifies what the risk of rejecting religious ideas might be, because he, in my view, is someone who replaced the idea, the belief in dogmatic religious stuff with just an over belief in the scientific method and in statism. So during the lockdowns, for instance, he was firmly on the wrong side of every debate and just thought that the government should decide everything for everyone. And this is why where my thinking is different on this subject today. I think it's I nowadays I view the state as maybe I did back then too, but I view the state as yet another religion. Back when I wrote this, I don't think I viewed this as the worst one, but I'm very close to doing that now. So, I mean, some religions are really wacky, but statism is a very dangerous one. Putting your belief in that there will be some savior here on earth, regardless of it's a religious savior or a political one, is super, super duper dangerous. So my stance has always been, think for yourself, do your own thing. Like that scene from Life of Brian with We're All Different. That's what I want people to get away from this. Like, there is a way to live your life, setting your own rules. Also, I would say that there are a priori arguments against God, but that's another thing. I think, for instance, since all action is a product of or all human action is a product of a human feeling slightly uneasy and seeing something in the future that might make that future better for that human, where the uneasiness is relieved. That's what triggers action. And any omnipotent being that governs everything and knows everything would never feel uneasy about anything, and thus never do anything. So if there is a deity, that deity is completely never has an incentive to do anything. So yeah, that's another thought there. Curious to hear what you think about this, Luke.
Yeah, thanks, Knut. And well, no, and actually, first I'll just say, like, we don't disagree about a lot especially in the perspective of that. Yeah, modern religions have many of their own problems, and knowing what this all ties into, I think is kind of the point here. This sort of financial atheism thing. I don't want us to get bogged down in the atheism of the financial atheism topic. I want to talk about the financial atheism, but there are a couple of things that specifically I'll address here. One is I think you can't avoid mentioning Sam Harris because he's one of these so-called four horsemen of the whatever they called it. Like it's a specific group you mentioned. That's why you mentioned Daniel Dennett, who I think you've mentioned this, is he's underappreciated, but he is the least prolific or the lowest profile of the four.
Yeah.
Notwithstanding that Christopher Hitchens died, but he was very high profile while he lived.
Yeah, and Christopher Hitchens, by the way, is the guy among this group that I'm most influenced by. Closely followed by Richard Dawkins, who I think is very underappreciated too in the Bitcoin space. I mean, the man coined the word meme for Christ's sake. So yeah,
and what's funny is that I think he had a point where he could have embraced meme, different meanings of the word meme, but basically he stayed pretty rigid in his thinking. Although I think he has gone on. Is it even a couple of Bitcoin podcasts? Was he on What Bitcoin Did?
No, he was on
Breedlove, I think.
He was on he was on the What Is Money show.
Yeah.
Even though they didn't, like, nowadays, like Dawkins is old, right? And he refuses to touch certain subjects, economics being one of them, which is both good and bad. I would love to hear his ideas about it, since he's been a bit of a statist too, and how that aligns with the atheism thought. But I can understand that he doesn't want to be, pigeonholed. I think he wants to stick to talking about biology, and that he has dropped most of the religion versus non-religion stuff because he simply doesn't want to go there. He wants to spend his time talking about biology.
Right. No, and that's understandable for him. But I think he's all four of these guys are influential, and I understand why these guys and their ideas they really set the tone for a certain decade or even couple of decades of thought, and especially thought that was in opposition to primarily the evangelical Christian right in the United States.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah.
And I really think the thing here is this.
No, I wouldn't say primarily. I would say primarily against Islam. I'd say but maybe packaged in a way that made the evangelical right in the U.S. Take offense. but I think what triggered these books to be written was mostly 9/11 and Islam.
That's interesting. I mean, if I'm remembering part of the cultural milieu at the time, though, what happened after 9/11 was that the evangelical right was ascendant in the United States for a while also, and those were the people that they were primarily bashing heads with. You didn't get a lot of Dawkins or Hitchens or Sam Harris debating Islamic scholars, for example.
No, but they sort of promoted people like Ayaan Hirsi Ali and other people who had escaped Islam, and pointed out that the underlying problem of Islamist terrorists is Islam itself, and how the texts are written in a certain way, and which can't really be interpreted one way or another, and pointing out that some ideas are really and some cultures are really worse than others. And there should be no shaming in saying that. And I agree with that very much.
This is a spicy one, definitely. But I think the only part that I actually disagree with here, because it's not a disagreement, it's just more like they found themselves bombarded on all sides, really, the neo-atheists. They got it from evangelical Christians, they got it from Islam. Maybe they were primarily targeting Islam, but they definitely got into lots of arguments with debates. Some of them were actually sort of debates with evangelical Christians. And actually this is the one thing here too, is that I think you use atheism as sort of the absence of the Judeo-Christian Islamic God.
The absence of any deity. So including like Zeus and Thor and all of that. So I'm using the same definition as Richard Dawkins uses in his the God Delusion. That's right. That's where I got it from.
But I'm saying your example you used is you're basically counteracting specifically the Christian and the Islamic God, this omnipotent, omnipresent thing. Many of the others don't do that. Right?
Oh, well, that was not in my definition of the word atheism. Right. That was in my why I personally don't think that there's an omnipotent being.
Sure.
So that's the definition of that. And but the word itself is, to me, is atheism. It's self-explanatory. It's a rejection of theistic beliefs. And here I agree with Christopher Hitchens that extraordinary claims require extraordinary evidence, and I haven't seen any such extraordinary evidence of the existence of any deity. So until I do, I remain a skeptic and not a theist.
Well, there we go. And actually, I think when you say the term rejection here, this I think is important, because I think many are uncomfortable, myself included, with identifying or self-using the term atheist. And I think it is actually a proactive term. You say you're an atheist because you have intentionally rejected all of the other things. There's something else that is sort of the I don't care, which is more where I'm at. Like, I don't care. I don't actively reject the other things, but I don't really believe in anything specific, but I don't particularly care either enough to consider myself or identify with the term atheist.
No, and the word has been somewhat tainted, but to me, it's a word that is similar to the word liberalism or any other word that has been sort of hijacked by political forces or religious forces in the talking about the word atheism. I think that one can shun these words or use them as they were once intended, but what I'm trying to do here in this chapter is just explain a position, and it's not really a chapter about the debate of the existence or non-existence of God or anything, or Judeo-Christian values or anything like that. It's about Bitcoin, and we're getting to that.
All right, good. Here we go. Next one. In 2008, another subculture movement of unbelief was born. Let's call it financial atheism, the rejection of unverifiable value claims. With the invention of Bitcoin, a way of rejecting fraudulent expressions of a token's value was born. Those of us fortunate enough to have been born in secular countries all enjoy not having the ideas of religious demagogues dictating our lives on a daily basis. We can choose which ideas to believe in and which to reject. What we still have very limited means of choosing, however, are the ways in which we express value to each other. We're told to use a system in which we all have a certain number of value tokens assigned to our name, either as a number on a screen or as digits on paper notes. We all live in the collective hallucination that these numbers are somehow legit and that their authenticity is not to be questioned. A Bitcoin balance assigned to a certain Bitcoin address might seem just as questionable to a layman, but if you have a basic understanding of the hashing algorithms and the game theory behind it, it's not. At the time of writing, the hash of the latest block on the Bitcoin blockchain begins with 18 zeros in a row. These zeros represent the proof of work that ensures that this block is valid and that every transaction in it actually happened. If you can grasp the concept of a hashing algorithm, and if you have an intuition about mathematics, you realize the gargantuan amount of calculating effort that went into finding this particular hash. It is simply mind-blowing. To forge a false version of a hash beginning with 18 zeros just wouldn't be economically viable. Of course, you can never actually know that a 51% attack or some other attempt at corrupting the blockchain hasn't occurred, but you can know that such an attack would require more than half of the network acting against their own economic interest. Bitcoin is not something to believe in. You don't need to trust any authority because you can validate the plausibility of its authenticity yourself. It's the financial equivalent of atheism or unbelief. Satoshi wasn't Jesus. Satoshi was Brian of Nazareth, telling his followers to think for themselves. I wonder how many people know that reference.
Yeah,
Knut?
If you don't know the last reference there, I highly recommend Monty Python's Life of Brian. It's one of the best comedies ever made, in my opinion. Anyway, this is the view I somewhat still hold, or not somewhat. I still hold this view. Bitcoin is a way to verify everything. Like the only way you can know that no one is counterfeiting the more units of the money you're using is to know every single transaction that happens and that ever happened in that system. And the only way to do that is to run a Bitcoin node and actually verify it for yourself. So this, in this sense, Bitcoin is the first skeptic's money or atheist money or whatever word you prefer. The only one that doesn't require belief in the central bank and the politicians behind the money printer to be ethical. And this is what intrigued me about Bitcoin in the beginning. There's a reason that this is a quite early chapter in my book series here, because this is one of the most mind-blowing things to me. And I know many other people. This is what's so funny about the whole atheist versus religious people thing in Bitcoin, because I know just as many people that came to Bitcoin from a religious worldview and that view it sort of as a cult. I view Bitcoiners as the ones leaving the cult, not the ones in the cult. So, but it's fascinating to me how you can end up with loving Bitcoin for so many different reasons. And there are so many different paths to the same group of insights. So this is my path and what I've tried to explain in words here.
No, and on this section, we are in complete lockstep. I completely agree with you here. It's definitely a spicy take. It's a spicy take, but I agree with it. All the other money requires some kind of trust or belief, and I just it's one of those things that once you get it, right? Like we've talked about this before in terms of that there are just parts of the Bitcoin thing that once you understand the implications, it's definitely not a good thing that all of the rest of the money in the world requires verification, right? Like I'm not gonna sit here. I might be able to go and make the argument that there's some purpose for religious systems and people can find meaning in that, but no one finds meaning in the fiat monetary system.
No, and regardless of if you find meaning or not, like to actually know whether something is true or not, you need the don't trust, verify mentality. So sure, you can derive value from a story. I buy that, but that doesn't necessarily make it like true in the sense of this is objectively true. So in my view, Bitcoin is built like skepticism is at the very foundation of what Bitcoin is. Don't trust, verify is skepticism.
Yeah, and well, I think another interesting thing here that you include in the book at the time of writing, that the amount of work that goes into verifying each Bitcoin block. It was 18 zeros. This was back in 2019, though, right? It's way more than that now. So it just keeps intensifying, right? Yeah.
And I think that like the very core concepts of Bitcoin are here in this text. That it's expensive to try to cheat the system. It's more expensive to try to cheat it than to just follow the rules, and that's what makes it great.
Shall we continue?
Absolutely.
All right. The first law of thermodynamics, also known as the law of conservation of energy, states that energy cannot be created or destroyed in an isolated system. The second law states that the entropy of any isolated system always increases. And the third law states that the entropy of a system approaches a constant value as the temperature approaches absolute zero. In the Bitcoin network, participants known as miners compete for new Bitcoin in a lottery with very fixed rules. The more hashing power, computing power, a miner contributes to the network, the higher his chances of winning the block reward, a specific amount of Bitcoin that is halved every 4 years. The difficulty of this lottery, in other words, the miner's chance of winning it, is recalibrated every 2016th block, so that the average time it takes to find the next block is always roughly 10 minutes. What the system produces is absolute scarcity. The amount of Bitcoin in existence at any moment in time is always predictable. The more time that passes, the slower the rate of coin issuance, and the block reward slowly approaches zero. By the time it does, around the year 2140, the individual miner's incentive to mine for a reward will, at least theoretically, have been replaced by an incentive to collect transaction fees from the participants of the network. Even now, the sum of all fees make up a non-trivial part of the miner's revenue. Yet, from a user's point of view, the fees are still very low. And as the network scales up using layer 2 solutions such as the Lightning Network, they're expected to remain low for quite a long time ahead. So another connection of Bitcoin to physics, right?
Yeah, not directly tying it to physics here, which is good. But yeah, there's a wonderful meme going around about it's a Venn diagram, and in one circle there's people who are against Bitcoin or Bitcoin's opponents. And in the other circle are people who can accurately explain the difficulty adjustment algorithm. And in the middle, in the cross section, are people who don't exist, because you cannot be against Bitcoin if it clicks for you, the difficulty adjustment algorithm, and how amazing a discovery that is.
No, and I like the explanation here. This is just intensifying, like these first 2 chapters of this book, just speaking from the level of reading these both together. Like, someone reads this as the introduction to Bitcoin. I don't know exactly who's doing that, but if you're getting hit with big ideas right off the bat. This isn't for the faint of heart, but they're big, important ideas that really underpin what Bitcoin is and what Bitcoin is about. And I never thought of Sovereignty Through Mathematics as a beginner book, but in a lot of ways, it does explain a lot of the concepts that are important to know about Bitcoin. Just not in one of these structured ways that sort of handholds,
Yeah, no, I view it as a beginner's book. As maybe a very specific type of beginner. Is there like you said, faint of heart there? Is there such a thing as faint of brain?
Oh yeah, I know some people like that.
Okay, good to know. Let's get on with it, shall we?
Okay. Absolute scarcity is a concept that mankind has never encountered before. Arguably, this makes it the first man-made concept to ever be directly linked to the laws of physics. Everything anyone does requires a certain amount of energy. The very word doing implies that some kind of movement, some type of energy expenditure needs to occur. As mentioned earlier, how we value things is entirely subjective. Different actions are of different value to different people. How we value different things is also inevitably linked to the supply of those things. Had the trapped under ice winter diver mentioned in Chapter 1 been equipped with a scuba tank, he probably wouldn't have thought of his next breath as such a precious thing. The price a person is willing to pay for a good, in other words, the sum of one or more persons' actions, can be derived from 2 basic variables: the highly subjective demand for the good and the always constrained by time and space supply of that same good. Note that if supply is sufficiently limited, there only needs to be a minimal amount of demand for a good for its price to increase. One could argue that no one needs Bitcoin, and that therefore Bitcoin would have no intrinsic value. One could also argue that there's no such thing as intrinsic value since demand is always subjective. In any case, there will always be a cost to mine Bitcoin. And the more mining power in the network, the higher that cost. This cost, ensured by the Bitcoin network's proof of work algorithm, is probably as close to a pure energy cost as the price of a human activity will ever get. Once the mining rig is in place, a simple conversion process follows. Energy in, scarce token out. Should the cost of production exceed the current price of the token, the miner can just choose not to sell, thereby limiting the supply of Bitcoin in circulation even more and eventually selling them for other goods whenever he sees fit. In this sense, Bitcoin is a battery, perhaps the best battery ever invented. Now, I know you have some things to say about this section.
Yes, this is about how every action requires energy. So it's sort of about how physics and the objectiveness of physics and the subjectiveness of praxeology are linked together. Like we link the two realms. I believe that the dichotomy of subjective objective is somewhat false, but we're not going there just yet. That comes in Clown World way next year. So, but the thing that links the two worlds, so that bridges the two worlds, is human action. And in Bitcoin, this is very clear what's going on. You're sacrificing a very specific amount of actual energy, joules, even, for a slice of the world's only digital pie. Like I use the word absolute scarcity here a lot. If I'd written this book today, I would say that Bitcoin are not absolutely scarce, but absolutely finite. Scarcity is always contextual, so like it's not describing Bitcoin as well, I think. So they're not absolutely scarce. Well, they are too, but first and foremost, there's absolutely finite, which is what creates the absolute scarcity afterwards, or the scarcity of them. Scarcity is not absolute. It always fluctuates, and it's always in the eye of the beholder, which finiteness is not. I would say scarcity is subjective, somewhat subjective, while being finite is something objective. So it's still this harkens back a lot to the last chapter, because this is all about the demand being subjective and supply being objective. How it links the objective and the subjective, and I think that's a crucial thing to understand when trying to understand Bitcoin and the problem it solves.
Yeah, absolutely agree. And well, I think I'm still more of a proponent of the battery analogy than you are here now. But I still think it's useful. It's a really useful analogy here because the idea that a Bitcoin miner can expend energy and get Bitcoin back anywhere in the world, thereby being able to capture stranded energy sources or more difficult to access, but maybe not as expensive to access, something like that. It is a way of taking energy from somewhere and converting it into something that can be then sold for other goods and services. So the battery analogy, it's not a literal battery. It's not a literal battery in the sense of an electrical battery. It's not a way of taking that energy and storing that energy for further use in the literal energy sense, the physical movement of something. But it is a battery for well, in the sense that you can hold some of that value. You can capture that value and move it over the internet and use it later. So in that sense, I think the battery analogy still works.
Yeah, it stores, if you will, subjective energy, which is a very weird term, and it's like so the physics nerd in me prevents me from using the term using the analogy anymore. I'm not a super fan of it, but not only because it doesn't link to physics, but because it sort of underappreciates Bitcoin. Because it's more than a battery, it's an amplifier too. Because as long as the total economic pie grows over time, the energy stored or the value stored is not only staying the same, but growing over time. So it buys you more the longer you wait. And another part of not using the Bitcoin is a battery analogy anymore is that I don't like the term digital energy, because I think digital to begin with is not anything crucial to Bitcoin. Whether it's digital or not doesn't really matter. And the energy metaphor omits that a Bitcoin miner is not the ASIC that is plugged into the wall or the hangar full of them. The computers involved. It is the actual miner is the guy who owns the ASICs and decides to run the code, which we explain further in Clown World 2. So I think almost all metaphors and analogies in Bitcoin are somewhat insufficient to describe what Bitcoin is, because Bitcoin is so much more than the sum of its parts, and it's very hard to isolate one thing or another that it is when it's so much bigger than that. So every single metaphor is underwhelming or insufficient in some way.
I can agree with that on the one hand, while on the other saying that each of these metaphors is a way to maybe get into someone's brain.
Yep.
And it only takes one, right? I think that's one of the points of Bitcoin, is that once one thing clicks for you, you suddenly discover all the things, and then everything clicks. You take the orange pill, and suddenly you're a toxic Bitcoin maxi, something like that.
Yeah.
So the battery analogy is useful in that sense, as being a way of propagating an idea that might take hold with some people, especially those that value, or actually, especially with those who think that Bitcoin mining is this evil thing and don't understand what it's actually doing. And the real world effects that I really, really doubt that Satoshi could have ever envisioned for Bitcoin. The effects that Bitcoin mining, chasing down all of the cheapest energy in the world, actually have.
No, he probably didn't predict that. Like, one thing I thought of now when you're talking about that it might have a usefulness is that's akin to the religious stories, right? So this is Bitcoin as a battery might not be literally true, but it might have some storytelling value, just as, the meek shall inherit the earth, or some religious thing that you can interpret in a way that has value to you. And that's how I view metaphors for what Bitcoin is in one aspect or another.
Perfect. Let's keep going, shall we? Storing and moving electrical energy around has always been costly and wasteful. Bitcoin offers a way of converting energy into a small part of a specific number, a mathematical battery, if you will. It is important to remember that it does not convert energy into value directly, but rather electricity into digital scarcity that can be used to express value. Energy cannot be created or destroyed in an isolated system, as the first law of thermodynamics clearly states. Bitcoin can express how much energy was sacrificed in order to acquire a share of the total sum. You can also acquire Bitcoin by buying it rather than mining it, but in doing so, you also spend energy. You somehow acquired the money with which you bought the Bitcoin. You or someone else sacrificed time and energy somewhere. Bitcoin lets you express that you see that there's a connection between value and scarcity by letting you sacrifice effort to claim a part of the total sum. I thought when I started reading this paragraph that maybe we had already kind of covered the point of it, but no, I think the actual point of this section that you always expend energy somehow to get the Bitcoin. That's a different nuance than what we were talking about, and an important one.
Yeah, and it's absolutely true. Like, you have to expend some kind of energy to get something back. Like, this is a completely voluntary system. You can't just threaten someone and say, "Give me all your money." Like, you need to provide something of value to the other person. Whether that is mining or providing a good or service, that's another discussion. But this is the point of the system. It's like an isolated system where people have to provide something that the other person values in order to get a part of this finite pie. And that's what makes it so beautiful.
Yeah, and this was one thing that just didn't click for me earlier on in my crypto journey, so to say. Like I didn't really understand what was the purpose of proof of work mining, kind of generally, and the proof of stake stuff. Those folks were making like really serious arguments, especially back when Ethereum was thinking of dropping the proof of work. And I think understanding things like this, that no matter what you do, you always are expending energy somehow. I think somehow that what that did was get it so that the mining isn't actually doing anything different than anyone else. They're performing the function for the network, like we talked about earlier, the block creation. But no matter what, someone is performing energy somewhere, or maybe an even better way of describing it is someone is doing something of value to someone else to get a nice token in exchange for that value. It all comes back. Everyone is doing something in order to get these value tokens that we call money. And Bitcoin is no different. It's just perfectly finite. So I don't know. The overall point is understanding this one. I think this one was really quite important to grok what Bitcoin actually is.
Yeah, and it also highlights why proof of stake, like we're living in proof of stake now. The Federal Reserve is a proof of stake system. The ones with the biggest piles of cash can afford the biggest guns and therefore set the rules for everyone else in the system. And if they have a money printer, they win that race. And especially if the world's reserve currency. So proof of work is so different, and Bitcoin in particular, because you can't just copy proof of work. Then that sort of takes away the point of proof of work. In that. This is the costliness thing. So it's sort of computer up until 2009, computers had been used for copying stuff. Everything on a computer is a copy of a copy of a copy. Like when you send an email, you don't actually send it. You copy the data and put it on the other computer. Like so everything is a copy. And Bitcoin flipped that on its head. Like how can we use computers to create something that cannot be copied? And it's by flipping the script completely and expending as much computing power as possible rather than as little computing power as possible, which is true for all, which is what programmers strive to do in every other aspect of computing. But this is just like, you just flip that on its head and you get something that you cannot copy. And I just love that.
I love it too. All this stuff, all this intricacies of mining and why it works stuff, super fascinating. Not a tangent exactly, because I don't think we'll spend much time on it, but I really enjoyed when we visited Slovenia, the Nice Hash conference, and got to have lots of good conversations about the mining stuff and deepen our understanding of that side of things. Always interesting.
Yeah, super interesting.
Okay, let's continue. The excitement we so-called Bitcoin maximalists feel about Bitcoin does not come primarily from the enormous gains that those who hopped early onto the freight train have been blessed with. Nor is it because we're in it for the technology, as can often be heard from opponents. Those of us who preach the near divinity of this invention do so above all because we see the philosophical impacts of absolute scarcity in a commodity. The idea of a functioning solution to the double spending problem in computerized money is an achievement that simply can't be ignored. By solving the double spending problem, Satoshi also made counterfeiting impossible, which in turn makes artificial inflation impossible. The world-changing potential of this invention cannot be understated, not in the long run. The more you think about it, the more the thought won't give you any peace of mind. If this experiment works, if it's real, it will take civilization to the next level. What we don't know is how long this will take. Right now, debates in the Bitcoin space are about Bitcoin's functionality as a medium of exchange and its potential as a good store of value. We might be missing the point. We cannot possibly know if a type of monetary token for which you're completely responsible, with no third-party protection, will ever become a preferred medium of exchange for most transactions. nor can we know if the price of Bitcoin will follow the hype cycle path that we all want it to follow so that it can become the store of value that most maximalists claim it already is. Maybe we've been focused on the wrong things all along. Maybe Bitcoin's greatest strength is in its functionality as a unit of account. After all, this is all that Bitcoin does. If you own 21 Bitcoin, you own 1/1,000,000th of the world's first absolutely scarce commodity. This might not make you rich overnight, but it just might have something to do with the opportunities available to your great-great-grandchildren.
Yeah. This I used the word divinity here in the beginning, and it makes me think of like how all these wonderful paradoxes. Gigi made a talk about this once, like how Bitcoin is fuck you money and love at the same time, and how Bitcoin is financial atheism and a religion at the same time. And this is one thing I've thought about in terms of like religious stuff and Bitcoin is Pascal's wager, which says that you might as well, the TLDR on Pascal's wager is that you might as well believe in God because if you do, you may go to heaven, and if you don't, you can go to hell. The problem that I have with Pascal's wager as a concept is that it simply doesn't take any of the other 5,000 religions out there into account at all. But with Bitcoin, Pascal's wager actually works, because if you believe in Bitcoin and if you devote your life to the God that is Bitcoin, you actually make the likelihood of this coming true and this utopia here on Earth is closer. The more in time, the more you believe in the concepts, and the more you devote your life to it. So Pascal's wager works, but only if by God you actually mean Bitcoin.
That's so funny. It's such a it's so funny that the wager actually works like that. And I mean, it isn't something that people are necessarily going to take up automatically. And actually, maybe this Pascal's wager framing is actually going to make some people viscerally oppose that somehow. But I think it's a good analogy that if this is going to work, it's either going to go to infinity or to zero, basically, being on the side of getting some piece of that pie. And again, this comes back to the absolute finite pie of what Bitcoin is. There's so many layers to this, but really that's the core of what did it for me. Once I understood, I mean, okay, what really did it for me was I got that there's no inflation to Bitcoin. Now, okay, ignoring that it's still technically inflating until 2140, but it's not though. Like I got immediately that it's 21 million of these things, and you get a certain amount of that. You've got that piece of that pie forever, right? As long as you can maintain control of your keys, which isn't trivial, but okay, let's pretend it's trivial. But that one thing means there's now a fixed denominator. You can put a fixed denominator on the economy. That's the unit of account part, basically. And if you do that, GDP growth is literally should mean that prices are deflating. It's just that the denominator keeps increasing at the same time. Also, this constant chasing of GDP growth is actually saying that there is more in the pie as a whole, and so prices should be deflating. It's the Jeff Booth hypothesis, which we have talked about. How you also have similar takes on this. I think later coming up in this book, right? We'll touch on this more.
Yeah, and especially in the next book, Independence Reimagined, that's all about that.
Yeah.
So I have a couple of other things to say about these two paragraphs and this book in general. All of my books, like the primary reason or what I want the reader to take away from them is just I want them to trigger a thought in the brain of the reader. So they're not like, I'm not advocating for one thing or another, really. These are meant to be thought nuggets. That's the Pascal's wager thing is a brain fart. Everything else in here is sort of brain farts that are, and if you happen to sniff on a particular part of your liking, then I have succeeded. Like that, you that is what the books are all about. Another thing to mention about these two paragraphs in particular is the word Bitcoin maximalist, which is it was intended as a derogatory term and invented by Vitalik Buterin, the creator of Ethereum, to sort of, to promote his shitcoin basically, and tell every Bitcoin believer who didn't also want some Ethereum that they were not open-minded enough. But as Terry Pratchett said, the problem with an open mind is that people would come along and try to put stuff in it, stuff like Ethereum. So, the Bitcoiners took the term to heart and wore it as armor instead. We are proud Bitcoin maximalists. The whole point of Bitcoin is that there can be only one. It's Highlander money.
I think we'll cover it more later. And I think now let's sum up. I think we'll take the last couple of paragraphs here. Throughout history, whenever a prehistoric human tribe invented ceremonial burial, that tribe began to expand rapidly. Why? Because as soon as you invent belief in an afterlife, you also introduce the idea of self-sacrifice on a larger scale. People who held these beliefs were much easier for a despot to manipulate and send into battle with neighboring tribes. Religious leaders can use people's fears and superstitions to have them commit all sorts of atrocities to their fellow man, and they still do so today. Belief in a greater good can be the most destructive idea that can pop up in a human mind. The Nazis of World War II Germany believed that exterminating Jews was for the greater good of their nation's gene pool. Belief in noble causes often comes with unintended side effects, which can have disastrous consequences. Religious leaders, political leaders, and other power-hungry sociopaths are responsible for the greatest crimes against humanity ever committed, namely, wars. Europeans often question the Second Amendment to the United States Constitution, which protects the right to bear arms, whenever a tragic school shooting occurs on the other side of the Atlantic. What everyone seems to forget is that less than 100 years ago, Europe was at war with itself because its citizens had given too much power to their so-called leaders. The Nazis came to power in a democracy. Never forget that. Our individual rights weren't given to us by our leaders. We were born with them. Our leaders can't give us anything. They can only force us to behave in certain ways. If we truly want to be in charge of our lives, we need to find the tools necessary to circumvent the bullshit ourselves. End chapter. Knut?
Yeah, this is the road to hell is paved with good intention comes to mind. That saying. This is basically what this says. And comparing the Nazis of World War II to religious sacrifices, that's another thing. I mean, the point here is that no man has the inherent right to rule another man. It's basically the non-aggression principle I'm alluding to here, and basic libertarian philosophy that the leaders of the world, whether they're religious or political, they have no inherent right to call themselves that and to take your stuff and to tell you what to do. And the sooner you realize this, the more fulfilling your life can be, because you can reclaim the driver's seat and start taking your life to where you want to take it, and not where some power-hungry sociopath, which is the word I use here, tells you to take it.
Yeah. This conclusion somewhat is a little disconnected from the rest of the point of the chapter, and I mean, I think we'll come across that as this was more your writing style early on. Nothing wrong with that. It was just that the many of these conclusions were ultimately tangents to a certain extent. But in this case, it's not that it's totally unrelated at all. The self-sacrifice part goes back to the financial atheism generally, and this is again where it's sort of, I think that's one aspect of the self-sacrifice thing, but we touched on this in the first episode here, the first chapter, that the self-sacrifice thing is also what enables society to grow generally, right? It's double-edged sword or two-sided coins in all cases. Advancements always lead to increased productivity or prosperity somehow, or else they wouldn't be advancements, but there's downsides. AI is one of these things that we might be dealing with quite a lot here. But automation, AI, all this, like greatly increased cognitive advancements, but maybe there's an over-reliance on technology and less jobs to go around for people, right? And this self-sacrifice thing is another one. The very concept of these sort of proto-religions are also coincided with adoption of organized hunting, organized agriculture, the beginnings of civilization. But of course, the downside to that is that civilizations can be weaponized somehow, and I don't think we've ever gotten around that charismatic people who want power can persuade others, and having those people being also in charge of the money printer is probably also a very bad thing. Not probably, definitely.
Yeah. I mean, there's nothing wrong with humans organizing themselves in groups. We need that for survival. And we need intersubjective belief systems like language to get anywhere. It's just that when these belief systems come at the expense of the individual, they're objectively bad, or at least I view them as bad. So sacrifice is an interesting word. What you really want is not sacrifice, but delayed gratification. So you want something. You want to give something up in the now to get something later. The afterlife, belief in an afterlife analogy is because you can clearly see this, that when ceremonial burial is invented, then civilizations grow. But that's not necessarily because ceremonial burial was a good thing. If aliens saw that, they would probably view us as idiots. Like, why are you digging dead bodies into the ground and putting stones next to them? Because more so than good for the individual who is already dead, the ceremonial burial is good for the leader, who can tell you that if you do this and that in this life, you'll get a better life next time you're reincarnated or whatever, or in heaven or something like that. So there's a potential that these things can be used by people who you don't want to use these tools to make the 18-year-olds go and kill the other tribe on the other side of the river. In my opinion, civilization happens when we trade with one another, not when we kill one another. So it's basically a war cry for individualism versus collectivism, like everything else in these books.
Well, what's funny here about this, and I certainly agree with that point, but I think maybe you overemphasize, like possibly I underemphasize or overemphasize the opposite. I think you overemphasize the top-downness of religion. I think there's ample evidence that that's not really how religion works most of the time. It's usually
I'm not saying that it's mandated top down. I'm saying that the psychopaths use the fact that other people have this set of beliefs for their own gain. So
good clarification.
And that's very important to clarify. I don't think that some psychopath came up with the idea of God. That's not what I'm saying at all, or the concept of heaven and hell or anything like that. I'd say that there's a risk involved that these people will use these ideas against people's best interests.
There we go, and I fully agree with that. And you know, I think the meta thing that if I can sum up my thoughts about this whole thing, that Bitcoin becomes a tool for the individual to safeguard against others being able to use money against them. But that's also sort of all that it is. The entire rest of the coin here is that responsibility still lies with the individual to do with it what they will. And the risk of the world going to shit, irrespective of what any of us do, that's always going to be present. But we can now do things. We can do one specific thing to take back some of that control and live life how we want to, associate with the people we want to. The community that is cropping up around Bitcoiners is a pretty awesome one, and it's a lot of fun to be involved in that. So yeah, Bitcoin as financial atheism. we might have a couple of disagreements on semantics of the word atheism or of the term sacrifice or whatever it is. But broadly, I think it's a very astute observation, and it's not atheism in a way that means to antagonize religious people. It's really the concept of money that does not need to be believed in, which is extremely important.
Yeah. No, don't trust, verify is the TLDR of this chapter.
Perfect. Is that where we'll leave this chapter?
I think so. I have many other thoughts, but we have plenty of time to discuss them in later chapters. So don't trust, verify, people. Like, subscribe, run a node, and brush your damn teeth.
This has been the Bitcoin Infinity Academy. Thank you for listening.